Thank you for joining us. With this morning's announcement from the Minnesota Board of Pardons, in addition to new information that we received from the legislature on the CARES Act funding, we wanted to provide the community with an update. Joining us on the call today is Mayor Emily Larson, Human Rights Officer Carl Crawford, and a representative from the Duluth Police Department. Mayor Larson, if you wanted to go ahead.
Yes,
I'm muted. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here today. It's a beautiful Friday, and there's a little bit of hope in the air today, and I hope you feel it. I do, and it feels good. Today really is a historic day for the state of Minnesota and for the city of Duluth. This morning, the Minnesota Board of Pardons met and made a determination to unanimously clear Max Mason of charges of rape from an incident over 100 years ago, just about 100 years ago now, in relation to the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial and the timing which aligns with it this weekend. So we wanted to share just a little bit of information about this. It will be 100 years on Monday that there was an incident that led to the lynchings of Elias Clayton, of Elmer Jackson, and Isaac McGee in downtown Duluth. Max Mason spent time in prison for this crime. 3 men were lynched, and this additional man served prison time for a crime that he did not commit, after being selected from a lineup of circus workers that had moved on from Duluth to Virginia, Minnesota. This has been it's a historic pardon because, of course, it formally, through the legal process and the legal system, acknowledges that there was undue process and a lack of justice in the way that these 4 men were treated 100 years ago. It also names for the justice system the deep inequities that date back hundreds of years as a nation, in our need for greater reparation. It's significant that it's happening now because it is the 100th, that's the centennial of the, and the Day of Remembrance on Monday for the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial. And I want to thank especially Carl Crawford, who is a founding member of the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial. And I want to thank Duluth Police Chief Mike Tuskin, both of whom have really participated in this process of the pardon. The pardon was not initiated by the city of Duluth. It was initiated by the legal community and by people involved with the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial. Finding justice for everybody involved is, of course, critical, and it has taken 100 years for this to be the case now. It's important to me that we acknowledge this on the day that it happened because we live in this very dynamic time when so much injustice is being revealed fully in the bright light of day. And so as we experience the murder of George Floyd, as we see daily demonstrations of people's demands for greater accountability and transparency, the alignment with this just makes it too important to ignore and too important not to name really specifically. So you're going to hear from Carl Crawford today, our Human Rights Officer, and then you'll also hear from Ingrid Hornibrook, who is representing the Duluth Police Department. Chief Tuskin has a really unusual connection to the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial, and it was his great aunt, I think, if not his great aunt, Irene Tuskin, who had made an accusation of these circus workers. And so his connection to it comes at it from a variety of different angles and with a deep humanity and humility as well. So with that, Kate, I think I've introduced it enough, but would really love to hear from Carl and from Ingrid.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor. Carl, you are up and unmuted. Go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor Larson, and thank you everyone for joining us today. This is truly a historic time for Duluth, Minnesota, and for the state of Minnesota. To have this pardon happen for Max Mason, and it just goes on to prove that there is always the right time to do what's right. This ball has started rolling for a very long time to get us where we are today. And being an emeritus of the Clayton Jackson McGee Board, I'm so proud of the work of the board and the many folks that work to bring this to light, bring this truth to light on the 100th commemoration and recognizing of the lynching of what happened. And for the Clayton Jackson McGee Board, this kind of brings us full circle at having the name of Max Mason cleared. And, you know, we said it for a long time that he was innocent, but now it's true, and it's in print, and we know it to be true. And it's a very exciting time and a huge step for our legal system in the state of Minnesota to go back and recognize a wrong that was done. Is there more? Shall I pass it along to Ingrid at this time?
That was great, Carl. Thank you. Next up is Ingrid Hornibrook, the Public Information Officer from the Duluth Police Department. Ingrid, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Mayor Larson and Carl. As stated, Chief Tuscan is unable to be here today. He is experiencing a death in the family this week, and while he did testify this morning at the hearing, he is now with family for the rest of the day. So he did provide a statement for me to read today, and he says, "The pardon of Mr. Max Mason today represents a long and painful road to justice. Justice denied for a century. Today, we were witness to justice, bringing the truth out of darkness and into the light, and may history reflect and restore his good name." Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. And then, as I mentioned before, we also have an update on the CARES Act that I know many of you have been waiting for. And so to talk more about that, Mayor Larson, I'll hand it back to you.
That's great. Thank you, Kate. So I'm just having a little bit of a hard time moving on from this topic because it really is so moving and so important. And so just really want to thank everyone who was involved. Again, the city is not claiming credit for this pardon. We are not seeking to, suggest that we were at the front end of that, but it's clear that the front end of justice is where we need to be. And it is not lost on me, the era we are living in, and the calls that we are seeing that we need to answer as a city, as a municipality, as a society. And I'm deeply committed to that work with all of you. And I know you have very high expectations of your local government to be a source of service for you, but also a demonstration of what is right and just, and ensuring that everyone has equitable access to what they need. And just want to assure you that I hear that call and we are working towards that. And I really appreciate, Carl, your grounding your comments in the reality and the truth of a statement that the time is always right to do what is right. And so I have deep feelings for the Mason family having a narrative change so unexpectedly 100 years ago, and to have that wrong corrected today. I wish his mother could see that. That would be a nice thing for his family. So with that, it's a very bizarre transition to make into federal funding. And I just want to acknowledge that there's no ideal way to make a smooth transition between disjointed topics. And yet we must do that today. So there is the CARES Act that we have been talking about for a couple of months. That was passed on the federal level in conjunction with COVID-19 and anticipating that governments would need some kind of support. The federal government passed it in March. It was allocated, pots of money were allocated to different states. We have been anticipating $667 million at the Minnesota state level to be allocated to states and counties, but primarily cities across the state. We are still learning about the definition of what we can use that money for. But it's very, very clear that it is, and it's very clear in its language that it is not intended to be used to fill revenue gaps. It is intended to help cities pay for the costs incurred of responding to and anticipating COVID-19. So today in the Minnesota Senate is a version of allocation of that funding. And I have a few things I wanted to share. We were anticipating that $667 million would be allocated to cities across the state of Minnesota. And that number is actually $840 million that will be allocated to cities across the state of Minnesota. We have been working very closely with a coalition of cities and the League of Minnesota Cities and our lobbyists and our delegation, who has been terrific in demonstrating and articulating our financial need as it relates to COVID-19. And we anticipate that the formula funding that is being proposed would provide $6.5 million to the city of Duluth. St. Louis County would get a separate allocation, but the city of Duluth could benefit in what we are anticipating to be $6.5 million. As I have talked about, in the past, we have a budget hole this year somewhere between $20 million and $38 million, and I understand that's a big pendulum swing. And we are able to clearly articulate our financial need because we are experienced with emergencies. And so next week, I hope to provide a more informed budget update to all of you at the Wednesday press conference to provide an update on what we are officially going to be receiving from the CARES Act funding, what we can use that for, an update on what we have received for tourism tax, for sales tax, for property tax, all of the other revenue sources, so that we can turn around and give you hopefully a pretty good update on where we stand. But again, that $6.5 million will not go to meet some of the huge gaps that have been left with revenue shortfalls. We do anticipate it's actually being introduced right now. I think actually as we speak on the Senate floor, it is a bipartisan bill. They have a kind of a global understanding between the parties. It is our understanding that this formula is something that the governor also supports, and it is being written in that it needs to be allocated to cities by June 30th. So again, it's June 12th, which is, it's great. It's the first day of special session. They are taking care of this priority issue. We appreciate that. We value that. It will be weeks before we see any result of that, but we are ready to make our case and ready to be on the front lines of continuing to help you and this community respond to COVID-19 and all of the many other intersections of activity that we're seeing now in the city of Duluth.
Thank you, Mayor. And with that, I'm not sure if there are any questions, but if there are questions, we're ready to answer them. And if not, maybe we covered everything, which is okay too. Kelly from the DNT, go ahead.
Hey, thanks for taking my question. I know that the language in the bill probably, of course, isn't finalized yet, but considering the fact that it can probably only go to COVID-related costs that the city has incurred, I mean, right now, what's the city?
Sure. Thanks for your question, Kelly. Mayor Larson, would you be willing to take a stab at that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kelly. And again, this is where we're going to be looking at the language, because if it allows us to help pay for the time of first responders and to pay for overtime for different things, that helps us gauge what some of those costs and what they are qualifying them as. So I can tell you that in terms of technology and computers and things like that, we have less than $200,000 of cost. I can tell you that we have had to refocus how we staff certain 24-hour programs, like policing, for instance. They switched their schedule to a more costly schedule, but it allowed police officers to spend a few days on and then enough time off that they could have any kind of germ containment and that kind of thing. So it really depends on what the language is, because if they're going to allow us to do that, I can tell you we can make the case for all of it. But we will know more about that on Wednesday after we've had a chance to fully review what gets passed. I think they are anticipating the Senate would pass that today. It would move to the House. It would be signed by the governor. All of that could go pretty quickly if everyone has met and kind of agreed globally on some financial formula. Then we will work within the means of that financial formula and make the case for every single payment.
Thanks, Mayor Larson. Kelly, I hope that answered your question. I know that Nishay Taylor from Fox had a question. Nishay, go ahead.
Thank you, Kate. This question is for Carl. Since you are one of the founding members of the memorial, I'm sure this is a fulfilling situation for you. Obviously, it's fulfilling for everyone, but for someone who started the memorial to, make change, how fulfilling is this journey for you?
Hi there, and thank you for the question. This is part of the completion of the circle. We haven't quite completely closed the gap, but this is a huge step in bringing what we wanted to represent the memorial, and that is an opportunity to heal and an opportunity for justice and a chance to not only focus on the crime that happened there, but how do we heal and move forward from that? And having Max Mason's name cleared now fully tells the narrative that there was not a rape that had occurred, that a man did go to jail, wrongfully accused, and that the system failed him at that time. And it's not only Minnesota history, but it's an American history story about what happened here and how we, as a nation, can change and go back and undo what was wrongfully done to someone. That Max Mason lost, I believe it was 3 to 4 years of his life in prison. And that didn't happen, and it should not happen. And I think timely-wise, this is a great time that this is happening in our state and in our city.
Thanks, Carl. Nishay, it looks like you have a follow-up question. Go ahead.
And also, if Carl and Mayor Larson could both answer this question, what message would you give to his family right now? I'm sure his family is learning about this. So what message would you give to them?
Carl, do you want to go first?
Sure. First, apology. Again, an opportunity to say that, we recognize that this wrong has happened, but also an opportunity to say that their legacy, Max Mason's legacy, is going to change in the narrative of how we talk about the incident and what happened in Duluth. Like I said earlier, we've all been saying it, but now we can say it loudly, and we have the proof that this has been that he was wrongfully accused. And it's an opportunity for that family to reclaim the name of Max Mason and to change the narrative of what happened in Duluth.
Yeah, I think for me, Nishay, thank you for asking that question. I would apologize. The Mason family deserves an apology. And I'm sorry that their name and their son's life was taken off course because of accusations that were untrue and unfounded and unjust. And they deserved a different story, and he deserved a different life. And that he has spurred a legal community to acknowledge injustice, which is really significant. And it aligns at a time of critical cultural and societal significance. And so the timing of it now makes it a beautiful opportunity to honor his name, his legacy, his experience as something that nobody should have to experience. And, the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial Committee and group, they are having events this weekend. And so I would strongly encourage the media and journalists on this call to provide that kind of information to your viewers and your readers, because there are events on Sunday and Monday that are really important. We do these events as a community because it's really important to honor the hurt that people have experienced at the hands of others, and to assure people that their life does matter. The life of Mr. Jackson, Mr. McGee, and Mr. Mason, their lives really mattered. And they mattered to their mothers, they mattered to their sisters and their brothers and their friends. And, it's our job to remember those names so that we don't keep adding more to those memorials.
Thank you, Mayor Larson. Any other questions? All right. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thanks again for joining us. Take care.